All right, so I know people are still logging on, but it's 3 o'clock, so we'll get started. Hi everyone, and thank you again so much for joining. If you just joined, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. My name is Sara Shafiq, and I'm the Active Citizenship Manager at North York Community House, and we're so excited for this event today. A little housekeeping before we get started. You will see in the video gallery that we do have simultaneous ASL interpretation today. And I also want to let you know that we have live simultaneous French interpretation as well. I know that we have a number of Francophone participants that have joined us today. And at the bottom, you'll see that there is an icon on Zoom at the little bar at the bottom of your screen where you can toggle between English and French. So feel free to use that feature if you would like to access it. And lastly, this meeting will be recorded and available to watch online afterwards. So if you want to turn off your video or turn on your video, just keep that in mind. Before we get into the event program, we would like to start this event with a land acknowledgement, and I'm going to pass it over to Jin Ha, who is the Program Director at North York Community House.
Thanks, Sahar. So as Sahar mentioned, we wanted to start with a land acknowledgement, and we know many of you are joining this session from different parts of the province and beyond. So we invite all of you who are joining us from other places to think about the history of the land on which you live and work. And I think one of my colleagues is going to post a link to a site where you can look at the Indigenous history of the land that you are in across Canada. So Ontario is covered by 46 treaties and other agreements and is home to many Indigenous nations from across Turtle Island, including the Inuit and the Métis. We are mindful of broken covenants, and we must all continually strive to make this right with the land and with each other. So I, along with the other lead partners on this project, are based in Toronto, which sits on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Regardless of where you are located, many of us have come here as settlers, as immigrants, as newcomers in this generation or generations past. Some of us came to this land voluntarily, others came here forcibly, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. Therefore, we honor and pay tribute also to those of African origin and descent. Land acknowledgements and the work of truth and reconciliation invite us to reflect on our own personal stories, how we ended up as settlers and immigrants on colonized land, and what our responsibilities are to educate ourselves about the true history of our country and what we can learn and do differently moving forward. Many newcomers come to Canada with their own histories of displacement. Many are dealing with intergenerational trauma. Many of us have lived experience of discrimination and exclusion. This gives us a small window from which we can build greater awareness and understanding of the current realities faced by Indigenous communities and the many generations of trauma they have been through. Land acknowledgements also give us an opportunity to talk about the amazing wisdom, the strength and resilience found in Indigenous communities that enabled them to survive these experiences and still be open to truth and reconciliation. One of many pieces of wisdom that guides me is the dish with one spoon wampum agreement. It's a very old agreement. It's between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe, and all of us on this land are invited into the treaty. We are all treaty people. This agreement is represented through one shared dish, one shared spoon, and no knife. It guides us to take only what we need, to share through redistribution of wealth and resources, to live in peace and harmony, to acknowledge our interconnection, and take on shared responsibility to care for the dish for 7 generations to come. The Journeys to Active Citizenship project that brought us all here together today aims to move forward in this spirit, to acknowledge the interconnection between Indigenous peoples and immigrants and refugees, as well as with all Canadians, and the critical and valuable role newcomers play in taking on shared responsibility for this dish. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen, for that. That was very powerful and also very personal, which I think it's important to customize land acknowledgements and not just recite the word. So thank you for that. So for the event, we are so excited for this event. We've been planning it for over a month at least, and I wish that it was in person and we could feel the energy in the room. It's so different on Zoom. Before we jump into our very exciting panel, we want to tell you a little bit about who we are. The Journeys to Active Citizenship project is a new and exciting 5-year project that runs from 2020 to 2025. And the goal is to develop civic engagement program models and curriculum tools that will ultimately be adopted by settlement agencies in an effort to continue fostering active citizenship amongst newcomers across Canada. Our project is funded by Immigration, Refugees, Citizenship Canada, and we have 3 main partners. So I'll call on the partners now to say a few short words introducing their organizations before we jump into the performance and panel. So first is North York Community House, Shelley.
Hi everyone. It's great to be here, and on behalf of North York Community House, I'd like to welcome you to the launch of the Journeys to Active Citizenship. North York Community House, or niche as we call ourselves, is the lead partner to in the project, in the Journeys to Active Citizenship project, which, as Sara mentioned, is generously funded by Immigration, Refugees, Citizenship in Canada. I'll just tell you a couple of words about North York Community House. We are a multi-service neighborhood center that has been working with residents in under-resourced and low-income neighborhoods of Northwest Toronto for over 30 years. We're committed to building strong, vibrant communities. As a result of our work, newcomers are able to develop the skills, knowledge, and connections to settle, to gain employment, and to build successful lives in their new home and develop a sense of belonging. Children and youth are supported in becoming active, healthy citizens, and community residents are provided with training and opportunities that enable them to become leaders in improving their lives and their neighborhoods. So thank you very much, and I know that this will be a great afternoon.
Thank you, Shelley. Next, we have Debbie Douglas from OCCASI.
Thank you, Sara, and good afternoon, everyone. OCCASI is pleased to be a partner in the co-design initiative with NISH and Ryerson Democratic Exchange. We're looking forward to help create tools and curriculum for and by the sector to help immigrants and refugees use their voices to shape the communities where they live. We have and will continue to work with settlement agencies, not only here in Ontario, but across Canada, to understand the work that is currently being done in the field, and as importantly, to get an understanding of what resources settlement practitioners need to enhance and boost civic engagement activities and programming. We are pleased that OCCASI will be able to support the project through its community of practice, Settlenet. Settlenet is a national sector community of practice that OCCASI manages on behalf of the National Immigrant and Refugee Serving sector in Canada. Looking forward to this afternoon's discussion. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Debbie. And last but not least, John from Ryerson.
Hi, my name is John Beebe, and I lead the Democratic Engagement Exchange at Ryerson. We're part of the Faculty of Arts. And if you haven't already heard of us, I mean, we have a very simple mission, which is to build a vibrant and inclusive democracy in Canada. But that simple mission, as we all know, is not easy. And it's key to have partnerships like these, to work on programs like these. And I've had a chance to work with many of you on these issues, but we do that by building bridges between the settlement sector and nonprofit sector, academics, and the public service who share commitment to this work. So we're really fortunate to be here today and be part of this project. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing the stories today.
Thank you, John, and thank you to our project partners for all that you do for this project beyond just this event. So to kick us off for the event, we have a very special guest performer today who I'm very thrilled to introduce. We have with us Wali Shah, who is a poet and public speaker. Wali has delivered TED Talks, created poetry for corporate events, narrated voiceovers for commercials, and spoken at hundreds of schools and colleges across the continent. He has experience performing for President Barack Obama's keynote speech I think it was last year, yeah, right before the pandemic, and has also impressed notable figures with his freestyle poetry and performances, including Seth Rogen, Chris Hadfield, David Foster, and Kendrick Lamar. He has also served his hometown, the city of Mississauga, as the city's official poet. And I have to tell you, when we were designing this event, Wali was at the top of our list of people to engage because his work really speaks to a lot of the themes that we are exploring through the Active Citizenship Project. So we're super excited and can't wait. Wali, over to you.
All right. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me, and welcome to everybody joining the event. It's organizations like OCCASI and Niche that are doing some of the amazing work that is so necessary and important to the many immigrant communities in Canada. And me coming from an immigrant family myself, there was a tremendous amount of challenges that we experienced as a family. And today I want to talk about my personal story, my narrative, the journey that me and my family experienced. And I want to start that off by sharing some spoken word poetry with you guys. Writing poetry has always been something that has been my creative outlet that I have been fortunate enough to make into my career. And I just figured it would be great to start with a spoken word poem for all of you. So this poem is called Home. When I came to Canada with my mom in '97, my mom told me that North America was the land of freedom, of opportunity, and multiculturalism. She always told me that we were home. But lately it's been starting to feel less like home, more like isolation and feeling alone, because things that I hear got me chilled to the bone. We're still fighting discrimination based on religion and skin tone. Because even years after segregation and the Indigenous Holocaust, all I see is people walking over people. Guns are cocking over people and people talking over people, trying to drown out their voices. But I hear them loud and clear. And I see them because they're here. The melting pot of North America runs on fear. Because here, people are more concerned with celebrity gossip and living urban, that cultural awareness is just a burden. Wake up, meet real people, and start learning, because people that fear Muslims avoid Sikh people wearing turbans. And that's not even something that Muslims wear. And there's a few other things that I'd like to share. The Muslims that brought down the Twin Towers, they brought our people nothing but shame. Why would terrorism be something that God would ever proclaim? Now they look at me and they think I'm one and the same. I think they're ignorantly looking for somebody to blame. Because my mom was walking home. Broad daylight in Mississauga, Ontario. She was walking by Dundas and here, Ontario, when a car pulled up and threw coffee on her, threw garbage on her. No respect or honor. They drove off as she wept on a street corner, and they yelled, "Go home, you terrorist. Go home, you terrorist." Home. This is home. Home of the true north, strong and the free. This is where you can be whoever you want it to be. Home is where we embrace differences between you and me. Home is where we celebrate our diversity. Home is where your neighbors catch you in adversity. Don't you agree? So to the real terrorists, those who hurt the innocent, the children and women like my mother, those who generalize others based on misconceptions, stop with your misconceptions and find the truth beneath the lies. And next time you want to mess around, pick on someone your own size. No. Scratch that last part. Because I'm not here to fight. My mother raised me better. But I just pray that we can change our home. together. Thank you. I see the snaps. I see the snaps and the clapping. Thank you very much, everyone. This poem is a very personal piece for me, and it is very difficult to talk about, but it is a conversation that needs to be had. When this happened, there were so many things on my mind. One of the things that I thought of is, this doesn't happen in Canada. This is only an American problem. We don't deal with that here. And that just couldn't be the furthest thing from the truth. It happens here too. And this happened in Mississauga, and Mississauga is a community that is incredibly diverse. There are so many different people from so many different walks of life, and to think that it would happen in that community was really appalling for me. I grew up in Mississauga, and to think that it could happen there, it really goes to show, no matter how diverse a community is, hate and discrimination will find a way to thrive. And the people that are affected by it, of course it's Muslim people, of course it's South Asian women like my mother, but is it only them? Absolutely not. Discrimination, racism, inequity is faced by so many different people of so many different backgrounds and walks of life. Let's talk about the Aboriginal community. Let's talk about the LGBTQ+ community. Let's talk about the Black community. Let's talk about the intersections between those communities. There's so much we could talk about. And when this happened, I started thinking about that. And we live in a time where it's funny that people are ignorant, yet they have the entire world at their fingertips if they actually wanted to go and learn. Isn't it interesting that ignorance can still exist in such an environment? Where if you think Muslims are bigoted people, you can literally go and research yourself about what they believe in? I find it pretty funny. And my parents struggled so much to come to this country. Coming from Pakistan, leaving everything, not knowing how to speak English, struggling financially as immigrant parents, not knowing how they were going to pay rent. There were days where I would go to school and we wouldn't have money for milk. I would eat dry cereal and go to school. My parents struggled. This is not what they deserve. But unfortunately, it's the truth about what happens. And happens to so many immigrant families. And the reason I want to share this story is because I know there's so many other people that are dealing with this. And it's organizations like OCCASI and Niche that are helping people that are dealing with these exact issues on a daily basis. I mean, parents that are immigrants, I mean, I had to read bus routes for them, tell them where to go. They didn't know which buses to take or which signs to read. Like, it's so many things like this, on top of the discrimination, on top of the inequity, that make it incredibly difficult and challenging for these people. But all that changes with the right people around them. All that changes with the right resources. All that changes with the right mentorship, with a good community. And as much as there's evil and there are challenges within our communities, there are also great resources and supports in our community. And that's what gives me hope and faith to continue the work that I do for all the people that are affected, not just like my mom, but so many others. And I think spoken word in general too is a powerful and super accessible art form, where if you want your kids, for example, for the many immigrant families that are here, one, please encourage your kids to step into the arts. Being a lawyer and a doctor and engineer is great. Being an artist can also be incredibly powerful. And I am living proof that you can still have a career as an artist. And the second thing I want to share, going back to my original point, is that this is so financially accessible. If you want to write and get something off your mind, all you need is a paper and a pencil. Whereas if you want to get your kid into hockey class, now all of a sudden you need skates. You need to find a rink. You need to buy equipment. You want your kid to play baseball, same thing. But to write is so financially accessible. I think it's something that a lot of immigrant communities should take a look at in terms of investing their kids into writing. They can share their story the way that I'm able to share my story too. And all it takes is paper and pencil. And the reason I wanted to share this with you is because I wish I had someone tell me these things when I was a young immigrant kid myself. For the families that are tuning in, for the parents, for the children, you are not alone, but it does get better. And there is hope and there are resources. I want to say thank you to Sara, to Miriam for inviting me and for letting me speak and share my story with all of you. I wish I had more time to talk more and maybe take some questions, but I do have limited time, but I know there's a great panel coming up, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of this event. Thank you so much for listening and for being a part of it. Peace and love, everyone.
Thank you so much, Wally. That was so powerful. And I think everyone can see why we really wanted you to be here, because you speak to so many themes that are a key part of this project. And we have an opportunity now to delve deeper into some of those themes through the panel. So next up, we have a stellar lineup of panelists who have incredibly inspirational journeys to active citizenship. Habon Ali, Kojo Damptey, Asmaa Ali, and Sara Asalya. We are super excited to have Owais Lightwalla moderate this discussion with our stellar lineup of panelists. I'm going to pass it over to Owais to moderate, but first, a few words about Owais. Owais is an arts leader and creative producer who is currently an assistant professor in the School of Performance, Faculty of Communication and Design at Ryerson University. Prior to that, you may have known him as the managing director of Why Not Theatre, which is where he spent 8 years producing sold-out runs of award-winning new works, national and international tours, and presentations from around the world. Owais is a lifelong learner and has been selected for various different programs and fellowships, including the Impact Program for Arts Leaders at Stanford, the CORE program from Harvard Business School, the 2018 Diversity Fellowship at Civic Action, and the 2018 Leaders Lab at the Toronto Arts Council. He's also currently pursuing his MBA at Ryerson University. He's also a wonderful moderator, very engaging, very funny, and we're super excited to have him moderate this discussion. So over to you, Owais.
Thank you, Sahar. Is there any agony worse than having your bio read out loud in front of a whole bunch of captive audiences? I don't know how I'll ever get used to that. But the panel that we have today is a really incredible one. These are some really cool people. I will not read all of their bios out, both for their sake and for the sake of everyone here, because we don't have a lot of time. They're really smart people, and there's much better things from their mouths than me reading their bios out. Needless to say, they're basically all top something under something, and you can go read their bios on the Eventbrite if you are interested, which you should. And what we're going to do is I'm going to ask a few questions. We're going to chat amongst ourselves for about 20-ish minutes. And then if you look in the chat, Mariam has shared a link and some instructions for something called slido.com, where you can put in your questions. You can do that as we go if you are thinking of questions as we're having the conversation, but we won't get to them until about 3:45. We'll flip into starting to answer some of those questions, and I'll kind of help facilitate that as well to the best of my ability, depending on how many questions we have. I have a feeling we're going to get a lot of questions. So without further ado, I want to say hello to Asmaa, Haban, Kojo, and Sara. Thank you so much for joining us. And let's just jump into some real talk. I'm really inspired by Wali's story and his motivation to write and tell his story and why he does what he does. So I want to ask that question to all of you, and maybe Haban, we'll start with you. Why do you do what you do? What drives you to engage in the active citizenship work that you do?
That is a really good question, and I'll try to be concise because I know we also have amazing speakers here today. Asma's like my sister. We met online during this pandemic, and I do a lot of work with her, so it's really nice to be on a panel with her. My name is Haban. I'm 24 years old. I'm currently a graduate student at McMaster, completing a Master's of Science in Global Health. My thesis is exploring the experiences of Black youth in Rexdale, specifically Somali Canadian youth, and how their health and employment is impacted by COVID-19. I served for 2 years on the Prime Minister's Youth Council, where I helped to create Canada's first national youth policy. I'm on the board of Apathy is Boring, and last year I graduated as valedictorian from the University of Toronto with a degree in biology and environmental sciences. And I work at Mars Discovery District, where I'm trying to help to close the youth employment gap. And I'm not listing these things to brag, but just to say, like, I have my hands and feet in a lot of different things, and a lot of this stems from my family's migration story, my personal experiences growing up in Rexdale, and the educational interest that I gained as a result. So I come from a large family. I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters. And my youngest brother was born with a rare genetic disorder when I was 14, and he's now 8 years old. And he he spent the first few months of his life in Sick Kids Hospital. My dad at that time was a taxi cab driver and my mom an early childhood care professional. And to see them navigate, 12-hour shifts while caring for my brother in the hospital, we were really lucky to have our family with us at that time. My parents faced an incredible amount of medical racism that actually impacted my brother's life outcomes and his health and well-being, but also the mental health of our family throughout that journey and that time. So I got really invested in health promotion and just trying to understand how I can engage with people who hold power and make decisions for our communities, and have better outcomes for our communities. So living in Rexdale and seeing the impacts of poverty, whether it's educational attainment, gun violence, a lot of youth in our communities have prayed more funerals for young people than we have adults. And just even seeing how I'm here having done this work today, but someone I went to kindergarten with is leading a very different life path is hard for me to know that like your postal code or the region that you're born in Canada as a young person, as a child, can determine the rest of your life. So that's what really drives the work that I do for Black, Muslim communities, communities from lower incomes, to bridge that civic engagement gap and allow policymakers and our leaders to really hear us and see us as stakeholders and not just people that they have to talk to when tragedies happen, but actually acknowledge that they do work for us, they're public servants for our communities as well, and really just trying to bridge the civic engagement gap so we can get the representation we deserve, the policies we deserve, the programs we deserve, the services we deserve, and that we can be seen as meaningful stakeholders. So the survival of my communities is what drives a lot of my work and bridging the civic engagement gap, especially for racialized and lower income youth.
Thank you so much, Haban. So much there that I want to get into, but I want to also get an answer from everybody else. I'm going to move to Asmaa because you called her your big sister and you share a last name, but you're not actually sisters, if I understand correctly. For those of you who are watching at home, they are not related. But Asmaa, what's your motivations for engaging in citizenship?
First of all, I just want to thank Habon for I guess putting a spotlight on me. We do work together. We met over social media, just like she had said, but no, we're not related. And we spend a lot of time bouncing ideas off of each other because we have a lot of similar interests and our life stories mirror each other in a lot of ways. Since I was young, I've always been an avid member of my community, volunteering at my local mosque. And one thing that my parents instilled in me from very early on is that when you give and when you serve your community, it's not just a responsibility or a task, it's an opportunity for you to do a good deed and benefit from what you're doing. And so, my parents immigrated from Somalia after fleeing a civil war. And honestly, they never had much, but I was always impressed and floored by how open and giving they were with their skills, their time, and anything that they could spare. And so from just that, it's given me an example to be that serves my community. All throughout high school, I participated in student leadership and in university campus groups. In 2019, I participated in Dodge the Vote, and so I got an inside look at what Canadian politics looks like after spending a week on the Hill. I'm currently Alberta's top 30 under 30, and I'm also sit on the board of the Somali Canadian Women and Children's Association. By my work, I'm a registered nurse. I graduated from the University of Alberta in 2020, and my first year in this profession has been one full year working through this pandemic. So it's been quite the ride, but seeing the impacts of COVID-19 on specific communities, especially my community firsthand and in my patients, it's given me a better look at exactly what I want to do with my future in health and who needs to be served through this pandemic and where the inequalities really lie. I also recently joined Simon Fraser University's Radius Health Promotion Lab. And so from there, I hope to build solutions for, the things that I see in real life. I really want to focus one thing and, bring across one message that active citizenship isn't just, being a part of a board and being a part of, making sure that you have an extensive resume or, being a part of a university. These, colonial white supremacist labels and titles all encompass just that. And it's just prestige, essentially. And, there's so many skills that you gain as a young person, helping your family and helping yourself navigate through a country that technically doesn't feel like home for you, and making that into your home. So, learning about job training programs, helping your parents learn English, being a chef, a chauffeur, a lawyer, a social worker, a nurse, all in one as an immigrant child for your family and advocating for your family and other families like yours is a form of active citizenship. And I think that needs to be highlighted and valued when it comes to helping youth participate in actual structured youth engagement programs for active citizenship. So thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you. I'm just going to also remind us all, you have so much to say and you're so passionate, and we have some ASL interpreters who I'm sure are going to be grateful for us to just breathe a little bit and take our time. Yes, we have very little time to solve all the world's problems, but I know these people, they're really good at what they do, and I don't want them to get finger cramps. Let's move on to Sara, and same question for you. What drives you to do the work that you do?
Thanks so much. Oh my God, I am so humbled and inspired by Habon and Asmaa. I've been following their work for quite some time, and it's great to share this space with them. But similar to so many of them, I do wear different hats, but my work within the last almost decade has been focused on the immigrant space. My family and I came to Canada around 9 years ago, and we came through the economic class, which is a point system that actually favors immigrants with the experience and skill and the language. And we came here, we thought, great, we are like, we're the privileged one because we came through the economic class. But the reality was different, because the very same system has actually rejected us, devalued our credentials and our international education, etc. So for me at the time, it looked like education was the only pathway for me to enter the Canadian labor market. And I did make that choice, going back to education. But then it really struck me that it wasn't really about jobs. It wasn't really about employment. This is one issue only. But what struck me is as Wali and so many mentioned, we thought that we came here that Canada accepts people from different walks of life. It's the first country to have a multiculturalism policy in the 70s. We talk in the name of equity, diversity, and inclusion, but the amount of microaggression and experiences of Islamophobia, xenophobia, discrimination just blow my mind away. I would not imagine that this would be happening in Canada. And then my experiences, I think, with active citizenship really started from scratch. I was going into campus. I was really looking different. I was a mother. I was speaking English with an accent as a second language. And for me, I was asking the question, why are we mobilizing students to vote? Like, what's in it for them? I didn't even understand that, because democracy back home and civic engagement looked very different. I come from a war-torn country. So when we talk about democracy, we talk about how are we fighting occupation? How are we fighting colonialism and dictatorship regimes? So for me, democracy was different, and I had to go through a lot of learning and unlearning. So I started that journey at campus. I was very political, and I came to the conclusion, even after 10 years now, that actually everything is political, and everything is around three things. It's about access, it's about quality and funding, and who determines who's have access to what and what to access, and what is the quality of things that we are accessing, and how much funding our communities and neighborhoods are getting, as Asmaa and Habon mentioned. What zip codes do you have, and what postal codes really determine your ability to access things and the quality of things that you're accessing. I moved from being part of the student movement, the labor movement, into being part of politics. I supported 2 candidates running for federal government, canvassing, knocking on doors, went through the whole spectrum of civic engagement. But what I really do is, I wanted to mention that my work is focused in working with immigrant, refugee, and non-status students from across post-secondary institutions, looking at their experiences and supporting them while they build fellowship capacity and community. And the Newcomer Student Association is a grassroots membership-driven organization working at the intersection of migration, education, and social justice. So this is what we do. And on the side, I've been running a program that builds leadership capacity and civic engagement for immigrant, refugee, and non-status women.
Okay. So as you can tell, they weren't kidding when they said it was an incredible panel. No pressure, Kojo, but over to you. And I'm going to ask you a two-part question because I know you have some opinions about the words active citizenship. So what drives you to do the work that you do? And then what do you think about these words, active citizenship?
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, I'm going to reference how Wali started us off with here today, the concept of home. You know, I was born and raised in Ghana, West Africa. And one of our traditions is we tell young people, when you are born into a community, not by yourself, right? So in building a community, that's how we build a home. And every one of us here wants a home, you know? As settlers, we wanted a home. As newcomers, we wanted a home. Um, the caretakers of this land, this is their home, indigenous communities, indigenous nations. So I think at the core of it, we all want a place that we can call home, where we feel that our needs are met. Women have the space they want to have. Children have the space they want to have. So I think at the core of it is home. So when you see that your home or the place you ascribe to as being home has discrimination, oppression, white supremacy, then you have to do something about it. And I think that's what many of us have been called to do. And we see that if we don't do this, then whether I live in a 6 by 6 feet home, or you live in a 10 feet by 10 feet home, we are all not going to aspire to the dignity that we all want to, right? Until all of us are free, none of us are free. So I think that's the whole concept of what drives at least me to do some of the work that I've been doing. In terms of active citizenship, I want us to stay away from that word. I mean, philosophically. When we talk about active citizenship, it allows for difference, and difference are the things that breed discrimination, oppression, racism, white supremacy. Because when I'm a citizen, now I have the right to tell somebody that they should go home. They don't belong here. But when we talk about active residents, right? When we talk about active acknowledgement, then now we are faced, or the mirror is right in front of our face to talk about why we are even here, the history of this country, from the Indian Act, from residential schools, from slavery, from internment camps, from Chinese head tax, right? Those are the things that allow us to create a better society, and allow for us to share different stories, because we know we have different experiences. So for me, I think, yes, obviously you have to write a citizenship test and pass, but in terms of the practice of it, I think we should be talking about active residents.
Thank you. I really appreciate you problematizing that word right away, because it does get into this tricky area of like the language we use even. And another question that we can get into now is like the idea of inclusion, which again has a very specific meaning. Who's doing the including and who is being included? And some of the themes I'm picking up here in terms of what you were just saying, Kojo, about the idea of home and the need to take care of your home is really feels very connected to what Haban was saying about responding to the need for survival of your community. And that's not something that is, to what Asmaa is saying, it's not something that's driven by prestige. It's not something that's driven by search for status. And it's very much what do we have to do to survive, and what do we have to do to make our home safe? And that process is going to be different for different communities and different situations. So what is the way that we can talk about becoming engaged in our building a new home for ourselves as residents? What is a vision that you all have for how we can do that better? I'll just open it up to anyone who wants to jump in.
That's a really good question. And I think it starts first from understanding that democracy is not accessible to everyone. and we need to respect all forms of civic engagement, because sometimes when people don't have access to traditional methods of engagement, they can often partake in like non-conventional forms of civic engagement, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think they all hold a space in place in what we need to do. And in speaking about youth engagement for a moment, because that holds a deep space in my heart, you know, we always talk about centering the youth voice, empowering youth participation, but we don't talk about youth social exclusion and who can afford to be volunteering and what languages are being used, and are people being paid for their time? Is this information accessible beyond, you know, language or educational attainment? Because at the end of the day, issues being discussed, you know, across all tables, whether it's like housing, education, the COVID-19 pandemic, they're going to impact us all, regardless of the language we speak or how much degrees we have, right? So I think if the space from where you're making decisions does not include a diverse group of people, you know, you could be recreating harm and exclusion. It's bigger than get out and vote. Because, you know, if I say get out and vote to, you know, my fellow Somali youth who live in my communities, they'll be like, why should I vote when the politicians, you know, never respect, regardless of party lines, our experiences, and they don't represent us, and the decisions that they make for policies, programs, and services are never in our benefit. And, you know, I think that ends up alienating a lot of youth, and ultimately, you know, there's a counterproductive outcome of deepening cynicism and civic engagement being deterred. So I think Apathy's Warring has a really cool model called Youth-Led Democratic Innovation, and I encourage everyone to go read the Together We Rise report. But I think we really need to empower youth decision making, and it's not enough to create a space for young people to convene, but to give them true decision making power, and to give them access and control of resources to bring their ideas to life. And we really need to prioritize anti-oppression beyond training and tools, because you know, learning, I think, should never happen at the expense of BIPOC folks, because, you know, that's the experiences I have with systemic racism, often, you know, being at policy making tables, being at decision making tables, you know, hearing people speak about our communities, without our communities, the level of harm that can be recreated if there isn't a deep level of understanding or co-creation is harmful. So really to prioritize anti-oppression across all systems of oppression. You know, I focus on race, but there's so many other aspects that we could get into as well.
Other folks want to jump in on that? Sara, I feel like you have a lot to say about how you could fix access, quality, and funding.
I just want to build, what Habon mentioned really resonated with me, and what I'm going to talk about is really building on her point, is that I think the first step before we talk about engagement is really trying to address and eliminate barriers to participation, who's able to participate and who's not. And I think for me, it's more looking at the holistic kind of approach or definition of engagement, because it shouldn't be only political engagement or civic engagement. We really need to look at cultural, social, economic, environmental, political, civic engagement, all of these sort of engagement, and what are the barriers that preventing people from being engaged. And they taught us at school, when we talk about the spectrum of engagement, and what government oftentimes is doing, they start at the very first stage, which is informing people and inviting people, but we need to be shifting to the other side of the spectrum, which is using empowerment approaches. And that tells us that making people with lived experience as the expert in their own issues and centering their narratives and voices. But also, I think the engagement starts at looking at the root causes of social isolation, of politics of exclusion, of racism, discrimination, and of access issues. Before we talk about engagement, we really need to look at the root causes of these issues that are happening in the community.
Asmaa, Kojo, you want to jump in? As soon as you can find that unmute button.
I think I just want to, you know, reiterate in a different way what Sara and Habon both touched on. I think that's exactly the basis of, you know, the question. And I think it's important we talk about how youth and civic engagement, these spaces they're not as welcoming, you know, as we need to make them for young people of immigrant backgrounds. And, you know, when politics is such a coded world that is extremely exclusive, it's difficult for youth to actually feel connected to that and to want to participate in it and find solutions. And so when youth are never presented with solutions and we're never presented with, you know, here's our plan, please hold us accountable. And instead we're constantly met with, we'll listen to you, we'll hear you, we'll invite you to the table, and not actual solution building and creating actually a better life for young people and for immigrant families and communities, that again will just create that mistrust and alienation. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that we have a democracy deficit, right? And I'll give you one example. I always cite this when I speak. There's the story of the alderman, right? In Hamilton, across other municipalities, you could only be elected into office if you were a white man and if you own property. So basically, we had white men making laws of the land, deciding what was going to happen in Hamilton and other municipalities. And how is that a democracy, right? So that is a democracy deficit that has been eliminated, but we still have democracy deficits. Even political parties, the way they are structured, that's also a democracy deficit, because they pander to one aspect of certain communities, right? So I think that when we understand that there's a democracy deficit, it then empowers or allows us to talk about the things that is needed. For example, we have the Accessibility Ontario Disability Act, right? That every building and every government should be implementing to allow for folks that live with visible and invisible disabilities to partake in society. Some buildings are not doing that. Some governments are not doing that. So when it comes to voting, how are people supposed to vote? That's an example of a democracy deficit. So I think that we need to start exploring what that means and how it looks for various communities across this country. So I really think we need to start looking at that, and that's what at least opens the pathway to different forms of active participation, civic engagement, and civic leadership.
Thank you so much, Kojo. I really love the term democracy deficit. It gives such a good container on so many issues that, like, if we started to try and list them, it would take a very long time, but we all immediately understand what we're talking about when we say that. And even though maybe those laws have been changed on the surface and those regulations have been changed, doesn't mean, as so many people have said now, Habon, you started with this, that, like, do we actually have a functioning democracy? What is the definition of that is something that would be its own panel discussion. And I want to have a whole conversation with Sara just about, like, what that means in our context when we compare it to a war-torn country, or a country where, you know, you're struggling with occupation, and the idea of democracy and what democracy can even do here is so different. We have a question from the audience that I would love to share with you guys, because I'm very curious about what your thoughts are. They would love to hear someone speak about active or substantive citizenship in and with children, so preschoolers up to tweens. I think tweens is like 12, up to 12. What are your thoughts, Haban? Maybe you've probably got the closest access to youth work. What are your thoughts about children and how they can get engaged?
I think that was my entry point into civic engagement and seeing the importance of it. I think I definitely dealt with, sorry if you hear my siblings in the background, there's 6 of them, but there's some that are young children that I try to get tapped into as well. But my dad, my mom are Somali refugees, and they came in the 90s also fleeing conflict. And there's like this immigrant gratitude sort of that happens where you don't really speak about the issues or the challenges you're facing here, because it's better off than the home we fled, right? And I think my dad always had the news on, whether it was CNN, CTV, and he would engage me in discussions and take me around his friends or family and say, what do you know about this issue? What do you know about this global issue? And he was really like, we had those discussions growing up, and whether it was in Somali or English, you know, he really pushed me to have those discussions. And from a young age, it really made me think about my space and place in the world, and what what I deserve and the world that I deserve to grow up and live in, and my communities deserve as well. So I think it's never, for us at least, it was never too young to talk about civic issues because they impacted all sorts of our lives, whether it was like growing up in poverty, navigating the world as a Black, visibly Muslim woman. You know, it wasn't really a choice to have these discussions. They're thrusted upon us at the dinner table because events that happen in the world, like Wally was talking about his mother's experience at the intersection, like, you know, elections are the scariest time for our families, and we hate it so much, especially the 2015 election. It was an absolute nightmare when, you know, parts of you are up for debate, your identity is up for debate, issues that impacting you, you know, Islamophobia is on the rise. Like, we really can't ignore these things. And so I think my parents really made sure that we had these conversations, obviously with some limits due to how they see our space and place in the world, but I really here to break that and have those hard discussions. And I think children are so smart and they view the world in such a special way. And obviously, let's have age appropriate conversations, but like, let's not shield them from the world that exists, and don't doubt them. They can bring a lot to the table.
And if you don't give them something to think about, they're going to internalize whatever the world offers them. It's not like there's just going to be this vacant, clean slates. The void left by not having these conversations is going to be filled in with racism, probably. Does anybody else want to speak to this point? I have more questions coming in from our chat, but I want to make sure that
I just want
Asmaa?
one small thing. I think an important part of making sure children are aware of the world around them and engage civically is that we need to push for schools, provinces to ensure that education is built with, you know, an understanding of the world that they currently live in, and not just history and things that don't necessarily apply to our current world. Children need to be citizens of the world that they live in, and that means they need to be informed on the things that they, or, you know, are a part of, and, you know, what identities they represent and what kinds of people that they need to see and you know, understand and treat with respect to be an active citizen in this world. And so I think it's definitely our responsibility, and, you know, our responsibility towards future generations to ensure that our education is reflective of inclusion, of diversity, of equity, and of all the values that we talk about. We want to see them in the next generation, so we have to build it into the way that they learn.
It's interesting. I never thought about that. We teach history, but we don't have a course teaching future or even present. Those are just figure that out on your own. Another question from our audience is, what can we learn from non-Canadian cultures when it comes to building a more inclusive democracy? Wow, that is loaded. First of all, what is non-Canadian? But I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on what we can learn from non-Canadian cultures about building a more inclusive democracy.
I think I just quickly want to mention something, since we are talking Canadian, non-Canadian. What does this actually means? Because we have a long way to go, because there are certain laws and policies that says if you're a newcomer, if you are an asylum seeker, you can't vote. Yet we work, we pay taxes, we contribute to the economy, but we don't have a say. We can't vote. And that tells me that we are creating a kind of a two-tier system, differentiating between who is a citizen, who is allowed to be engaged, and who's not. And I think newcomers, at least at the municipal level, they should be allowed to vote. These policies and laws need to be changed. And Scotland is modeling the way. They just, in this February, actually a couple of months ago, they just passed a new law that allows voting age at the age of 16, not 18, and allow people with refugee status to vote. That's huge. That's inclusive democracy, getting people who are not allowed to vote and have a say. And in terms of, again, back to what do immigrants bring to this country? Man, we bring a lot of things to contribute to inclusive democracy. But the fact that someone like me, who's coming from a war-torn country and had their own understanding of democracy, it's really because I see a lot of the conversation going towards, and a lot of momentum and mobilization happening around election time and voting, which automatically send a message to community that civic engagement and active citizenship is about voting, and voting is the most important step. I think we need to plant the seeds and show different ways of engagement, not only voting. And even after voting is done, we need to continue that momentum of how do we keep our elected officials accountable, and how do we make sure that they listen to our needs and our best interests. So for me, what I can contribute to inclusive democracy is not only about voting, but so many other things, and that starts at the grassroots level, mobilizing communities, bringing communities together to talk about the issues that matter to them, that is impacting them. So I think that's something that immigrant communities know very well, and they can bring to inclusive democracy.
Very, very well said.
Yeah, and I agree with Sara. Like, residents should be able to vote at the municipal level, no doubt. And so those that are going through municipal elections here in Ontario, is 2022. That should be an item to discuss. How do we build that inclusive democracy? I'll give you one example. How about we start allowing our educational systems to teach in other languages other than English and French? Why? Look, we're going through a pandemic right now, and public health is trying to reach as many people in terms of explaining what the vaccine is, how to get a vaccine. And what happens is immigrant organizations, right, do the translation, do all the reaching out, the community outreach and all of that. So imagine if we were teaching Swahili and other languages in schools. That really elevates the level of even children's participation in education, right? And that also allows for true exchange of knowledge. The last thing I'll add is, we started off today with the Indigenous Land Acknowledgement. What do we take away from the wampum belt and the dish with one spoon? That's also a philosophy of knowing and being that we don't talk about, but then we're engaged in ideas of white supremacy. So I think those are some of the examples that we can actually implement, right, to ensure that we're really building on an inclusive democracy and not using it as euphemism.
I love the idea of learning languages in school. I think it's Switzerland where the kids in Switzerland learn like 5 languages from like elementary school because of the way wherever Switzerland is exactly. I don't know exactly where it is on a map, but like the neighboring countries, they have to learn like French, Italian, I want to say German, Deutsch. Someone is nodding in the video, so I can take that as confirmation that I'm not making stuff up. They have like 3 official languages and they speak like several more. And in some ways, if you think about it, like they're doing that out of necessity, right? Because the Swiss are a very small country actually inside the European Union, and they want to be engaged economically with everybody else. And the private sector does this no problem. Like, I go to my parents' house in Markham, and all the street signs, not street signs, but like all the businesses have Mandarin signage. TD Bank is in Mandarin in Markham. And I'm like, if the bank can do it, the government can figure it out. Like, we definitely have more Mandarin speakers in Toronto than we do French speakers. So like, why couldn't we actually embrace that as a official language once we have enough of that critical mass? And what does that do for power dynamics to say, you don't have to participate in our languages, which by the way, are not the indigenous languages of this land either. We can actually go on the basis of where people are coming from. I could do this all day. This is some really interesting conversations, and I'm really very grateful again to all the panelists we have here and the provocative thoughts that you're bringing forward. But unfortunately, we are coming close to 4 o'clock, and the next part of this is actually also very interesting because you're going to go into breakout rooms now, not the panelists, like everybody else on this call, and there will be some instructions given about a conversation that you can also be part of, and it'll be a little bit less of us talking at you and a little bit more of talking amongst yourselves. The instructions for all of that are going to come your way. Oh, thank you, Asmaa. You're very kind. Please give me a rating on ratemyprof.com. And I don't know, Sara, is there anything else to say about how breakout rooms work? I guess you guys will just make that happen. I'll just close off by saying thank you very much to Nietzsche and all the partners who've made this possible, and for putting me on stage with these wonderful people. I'm really humbled to be in the presence of this incredible group of panelists. So thank you.
Thank you so much, always. And to all of the panelists, you were incredible. We have a few minutes left until the end of the event. So in the interest of time, if the facilitators can just pop in the chat, maybe 1 or 2 key themes that that happened that were discussed in your room, that would be awesome. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope that you had great breakout room discussions and really enjoyed the panel discussion and performance today. Thank you to everyone who registered and attended the event from all parts of the country. We had representation today from Alberta, Ontario, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, Manitoba, and the Yukon. And we had people joining us from settlement agencies, colleges, universities, governments, school boards, foundations, advocacy groups, the private sector, and also immigrant and refugee clients from some of our organizations. Thank you also to our project partners, OCCASI and Ryerson Democratic Engagement Exchange, and also to IRCC, our funder, for helping to make this event happen. And a special shout out to Mariam Vahid, who worked so hard behind the scenes to make this event as amazing as it could be. We couldn't have had this event happen without all of her help and her work. So the conversation doesn't end over here. On the screen, you'll see some ways to stay in touch with us. So please join our mailing list. I think someone will be popping that link into the chat. And I just also want to let you know that the results of the conversations that happened today will be integrated into our tool development and will also help to inform the project's evaluation framework, theory of change, and the active citizenship curriculum that we plan to develop throughout the course of this project. And last but not least, I wanted to let you know that we've had a graphic illustrator at the event who is going to be capturing the themes that were discussed at this event and will be creating a visualization, which we will be sure to share with you in the coming weeks. So I think we'll keep the chat open in case people have some last minute words, but that's all from us. Thank you again and have a wonderful rest of your week.